Hi, and welcome back to the Apology Podcast. Today's guest is Sam McPheeters. Sam was the singer, co-founder, co-lyricist of the hardcore punk band Born Against. Born Against really stood out from the rest of the New York-based hardcore bands of the early 90s by being less tough guy and more cerebral, absurd, politically confrontational. And they also just wrote great songs. After Born Against broke up, Sam started a new band called Men's Recovery Project with his friend, the artist Neil Burke, who was also in Born Against briefly, and also in the great late 80s hardcore band Life's Blood, I might add. MRP basically came from Mars. They were usually costumed in unpleasant masks. They used bleepy, blorpy synth sounds. Seeing them live was really trippy and jarring. They were kind of like a punk version of Devo. No, Devo wasn't punk, so don't at me on that. So when Sam was in MRP, he wrote a couple of really great zines about being on tour in that band, and they were called Shooting Space number 1 and 2. And when I found them, when they came out and read them, that's when I realized that Sam was a great writer beyond just being a lyricist. Time goes on, and eventually I got him to write for the magazine I was editing in the 2000s. He wrote a great piece for me about the singer of the band The Crucifix and how he devolved into sort of conspiracy theory madness. This piece is New Yorker level great if the New Yorker covered the underground. I also published some excellent short fiction by Sam. And then later, after I quit that job and started Apology, I helped Sam with editing his first published novel, The Loom of Ruin, which is a really funny and violent Los Angeles noir about the world's angriest man, among other things. His second novel, Exploded View, which is a police procedural set in the near future, came out a few years ago, and now, like last month, his first nonfiction collection came out. It's called Mutations, and it's specifically about hardcore and punk music. Actually, the Crucifix piece that I ran in my old magazine is in there, so you can get it there. But the real joy in Mutations for me was seeing Sam finally write about his Born Against days and just ye old hardcore times in general. Sam has always been kind of loath to write about this stuff. He'll talk about it with friends, but he didn't really want to go public with feelings or memories about this stuff. And he's also frustratingly embarrassed by the music he's made, which is really annoying to me because it's all great stuff. Anyway, he's owning it now to some degree, and he's released this book that is essential in terms of punk history. You can take your copy of American Hardcore off the shelf, recycle it, and replace it with Sam McPheeters' Mutations. Sam and I have been friends for a long time now. We spend a lot of our time as friends these days texting each other stoned theories about Cro-Mags lyrics, and that's fine. That's some middle-aged former hardcore guy shit, but that's okay. Anyway, I recently sat down with Sam at his house in Pomona, California, and talked about the books he's loved, and that's a reading list that goes way beyond hardcore. Sam is a very serious, vigilant reader of all sorts of things, as you'll hear in a moment after I say, and now the Apology Podcast with Sam McPheeters. So, what are you reading right now?
Oh, we're just starting like that.
Yeah, that's how we start.
Arabian Sands by William Fessenger, and I had to look up the pronunciation of his name because I knew that you would be asking, and I'm not convinced that it's pronounced like that. Do you know this book?
I've never heard of the book or the writer.
He was one of the explorers, like post Burton, all those guys, post Lawrence of Arabia. He went out into the empty quarter, the Ruba Khali in Saudi Arabia, which is the world's largest contiguous desert, and just explored, just wandered. Yeah, it was after World War II. He was not a great guy from what I'm gathering, but a pretty amazing storyteller. There's tribes he meets that wear testicles around their neck. Really gnarly shit.
Nice.
I've always been fascinated with that place and always wanted to go to it. And then I actually flew over it 5 years ago. And this is like a really big thing in my life. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to see the Ruba Khali. And so the plane takes off and we're flying over Saudi Arabia. And I look down and it's beautiful, but it's just dunes. There's no variation.
Right.
And after 20 minutes of this, I'm like, all right, I guess I've seen that. That's cool. So I settled back in my seat. I watched The Expendables 3, which is a decent movie.
It's a pretty good one.
It's done. I kind of stretch out. I look out the window like, I wonder where we are now. Same fucking desert.
Yeah.
It's still going. That's how big it is. It just keeps going and going. And this guy traversed all of it.
What was he hoping to find? Did he have a specific thing in mind? Was there like a lost tribe or something out there?
I think it is a 1940s version of an inward spiritual journey, but he's way too much of a man to say it. So it's, I don't know. I'm not far enough into it yet to know the answer to that. And maybe he doesn't either. I think some of it is that he was very conscious of living after the golden age of exploration, and he wanted someplace he could go. And at the start of the book, he is in Ethiopia, and he thinks he's found the place. But then for a variety of reasons, he decides to go to Saudi Arabia and do this other thing and finds out that's the thing.
Was Ethiopia ever colonized? Do you know? I can't believe I don't know that.
Damn it, Jesse, we're like 5 minutes in and you're making me look dumb. I don't know.
Someone email me and tell me if Ethiopia was colonized ever in its history.
Well, didn't the Italians attack it in World War II?
You tell me. God, we're dumb. Fuck. Let's move on quickly.
You know, I've had conversations with multiple people about if you're smarter than me.
About whether I am smarter than you.
Yeah.
And what's been the consensus?
Usually no, and then I'm arguing in your behalf.
Oh, so it's your false modesty is the reason that you say.
I don't think it is false modesty. I think it's an extreme collapse of self-confidence that I'm projecting onto you.
Mm-hmm. I would say that I may have been smarter than you by a little bit when we first met, but I'm not now because I've neglected. It's like a muscle, the brain. And I've let it atrophy to some degree.
What do you think I've been doing?
You're reading these books. So wait, enough about my intelligence. Did you start reading this book because you are interested in explorers or because of this geographic location or both?
Both. There is increasingly a desire on my part to honor the person I was when I was a kid, and behind me writing fiction is because as a kid I really pictured myself growing up being like another H.G. Wells. But also I had all these other aspirations, like I was going to swim the English Channel, I was going to climb Mount Everest, and one by one I've had to just like ditch all those things. I actually just decided last week that I was not going to take up photography. Well, I guess that sounds dumb, but just like I'm 50 now, so I have to start actually I got to pick and choose which things I'm going to try and master. I'm still not decided on if I'm going to attempt to learn another language. My wife speaks French.
You've never learned another language at all?
No, I've
studied
school
Spanish or something?
No, I studied French 3 years, Latin 2 years, and I did a year of German.
Might I recommend ancient Greek?
Yeah.
See, I am smarter than you.
Yeah. See? Yes. Please tell those Jack and Innies I was arguing with.
Now, wanting to swim the English Channel and climb Everest and having this sort of H.G. Wells kind of ambition, those all feel like those are sort of like manly aspirations from a different time than the time that you grew up in. It sounds like something that like Teddy Roosevelt would have been. It would have been his itinerary.
Yeah. Well, then a little subset of that is reading about explorers. And I was like, well, I can still do that. So that's this. But I haven't. Most of the books, I haven't read any Burton books. The Richard Burton, not the actor, but the explorer.
I know about him. I haven't read his.
Who learned, 17 languages? At least 11 languages.
I always wonder, I think about 7 of those, he can just basically ask for a cup of tea. I don't know how much he really knows.
But he was enough of a badass of a man that he could kill you with that teacup.
Agreed. My favorite explorer who wrote was Alexandra David Neal. You know her?
No.
She was one of those Victorian era women who kind of went and explored Asia. So she became like a Tibetan. She's explored Tibet a lot in Nepal and basically became like a lama of sorts. And she wrote about all these magical mysteries that she found there.
I feel as a reader, being a reader right now, I feel like is my primary function beyond basic life functions. I would rather be a good reader than be a good writer or a good artist or anything else. And I don't think I will ever outrun this feeling of just being behind on my reading. I'm never going to be as caught up as other people.
Everyone who reads a lot feels that way. I think it's just a condition. Who reads like we do, like a lot.
I don't read a lot. I'm a very slow reader. I don't read a lot.
I get the sense that you've read quite a lot, but I don't know.
I do not feel like a voracious reader at all. I wish I was. I'm trying very hard to get faster at reading, but I don't know how to do it besides just reading more. Also, I have a lot of sleep problems, and I won't read, period, if I'm tired. It pisses me off.
Why you don't retain?
It just makes me angry. It's just work. It's not enjoyable. It makes me resent the book. And whenever I hear people, pretty much everyone on earth say, oh, I read before I go to sleep, that just makes me furious. I can't do that.
If I read in any sort of a reclined position, I'll be asleep within 2 minutes. So I can't do it anymore. I have to sit up, like bolt upright to read and retain things now.
Yeah.
But you're a very deliberate reader, right? So here's the thing. A mutual friend of ours, told me that you have kept a spreadsheet of every book you've ever read.
Oh, yeah. Which mutual friend would this be? Is this the same one who said in a previous podcast that I read constantly on tour?
That's the one.
First of all, I can't believe you interviewed him before me. There's
a thing
called
Brooks.
Chain
We're
of
talking
Command
about Brooks Headley.
That you flagrantly violated. Yeah, I read one book on tour. It was A Grapes of Wrath on Born Against tours. And the reason I didn't read more books is because I fall asleep in vans. I can't stay awake in a van or any public transportation, on an airplane. I'm out within, and it's not good sleep. Like I'm with everyone else who says they can't. It's not real sleep. I'm not dreaming.
Yeah, there's no real sleep on a plane.
Yeah.
But the spreadsheet, does it exist?
Yeah, the spreadsheet does exist.
Okay. Talk about that.
So the question is what
the fuck is the question?
Well, I have a spreadsheet that I keep everything in my life on. And so you're asking about the list of books?
I'm asking about the books. When did you start the spreadsheet? Because you can't, did you write down books you were reading when you were young in a notebook or something? Because Excel didn't exist.
No. Okay.
Until a certain point.
This is way less exciting, I think, than you've made it out to be. When I turned 25, I started keeping a journal. Like for real, I actually did it. And I just also wrote down all the books that I read. And so then when I stopped keeping journals, I went and just sifted out all the books and thought, well, I'll just keep a list of all the books I've read. And maybe 5 years ago, I then put those in a spreadsheet. And then I got sad. Oh, I wish I'd done this my whole life. And then I thought, well, why don't I just go back and complete the list forensically of all the books I've read? So it's never going to be a precise list. First of all, how do you count? Like, I don't count Dr. Seuss books. I don't count the books that I learned to read with. And so there's always going to be a zone there.
Yeah. I don't know why you wouldn't count them. I guess that's a personal choice. How many books?
Well, yeah, no, that does seem...
Approximately how many books are on this list?
Well, I just counted before you came over. It's 550.
You've only read 550 books in your whole life?
In my life, yeah. So, see, I'm not a voracious reader.
You probably remember what happened in those books a lot more than I do in the books that I've read.
No, Jesse. I was reading The Great Gatsby 10 years ago, and halfway through it, there's one little tiny scene where someone has some shaving lather on their face or on their ear, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, shit, I've read this. Yeah. I've read this book. I've only read about 20 books this year. Like, you got to really pick and choose the ones you're going to read, unless I right now own more books than I will read in the lifespan allotted to me if I get the next, 28 years.
It's just statistically impossible.
Yeah. So I need to really up my rate, and I'm confident I can do it, but to do it, I have to ditch a lot of other things. I'm not going to be a great photographer. I will not be a great graphic designer. All these things I really wanted to do, right, I'm going to not do because I want to do these two things. I want to be able to write at the level that I need to write at, and I want to be a really good reader.
But even outside of dropping those other hobbies or pursuits, how do you prioritize which books to read since you have limited time before your death?
So I grew up in this house in Albany. When I was a kid, my parents purchased a 3-story Italianate brownstone in Albany, New York for $3,000. And it was just filled with debris, just old furniture. I remember there was a rusty bird cage, like something out of a horror movie. So they had to get all that crap out. They had to just renovate. The whole house was gutted. On the first floor, I want to say the ceilings were 15 feet high. It was dramatic.
Wow.
They built floor to ceiling bookshelves on both north and south walls and pretty much filled them with books. And so as a kid, it took me a while to really figure out that was a motivation for my reading habits. Now I would go just grab a book at random off the shelf and see if I liked it. And they had amazing stuff. I discovered Kurt Vonnegut.
You actually gave me a Kurt Vonnegut book as a gift once.
I did?
You gave me Galapagos.
Oh, yeah.
I tried valiantly to read it. I've tried to read him a few times, and I don't click. Tell me what's good about Kurt Vonnegut. Why should I try again?
If you're not into it, I get it. There is a function of his writing that is what I've always heard everyone say about the Ramones. He made writing look really effortless and easy when I was a kid, so there's an element of gratitude. I just try and write something about something every single day. And writing is so easy now. You can just speak into your phone and edit it. The other night I was on the couch, and I don't know why, but I just started thinking about the Cars. This was before Rick Ocasek died, and I thought I need to really just write down my feelings on the Cars for myself to just get straight what I feel about the band, the Cars. Some of that also is just doing drills. I think it's good for whatever craft you're doing you just do it every day.
Yeah, you do that. You speak into the phone.
I've written the last 2 books just by speaking into a phone, and then I go back in and edit it. And as a consequence, there's typos in it that are phonetic typos that I don't catch because I then have the computer read it back to me as a way of proofreading. So I just caught 8 pages of single-space typos in Mutations, my new book that's coming out, because I spent a week just having the computer read the whole thing back to me at the pace that I'm talking now. Mm-hmm. And you catch all sorts of weird stuff. Commas. I think some of it is you sort of develop a skill for learning how a computer talks to a human.
So you sit there and you listen in real time to it, and when you hear something wrong, you pause it and fix that, and then
or
resume.
Just take a note, for an editor.
Tell me, you summarize your feelings about the Cars.
Geez, it was weird to me. I'd never thought about them. There was a time I loved them. I think they tried to pull off the same trick visually that Cheap Trick did. They had 2 nerds and 2 hunks. It's not because there's 5 cars.
Yeah.
But it's like an autistic version of Cheap Trick. Like if you watch their videos, they all seem like robots, even the hunks.
They do. I can't help but think that was, if not discussed, at least kind of, they saw each other doing it and they thought, that looks good.
It seems a little planned.
Yeah.
I saw Rick Ocasek once in the bus station in Washington, D.C., and in my memory, he was like 8 feet tall. He was just like a walking totem pole of a man. He was massive and just clearly just radiated some sort of autistic vibe that he was like infinitely smarter than all us humans. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit like in American Psycho when the protagonist,
Patrick Bateman,
has the psychic run-in with Bono from U2.
Oh yeah,
yeah, it was kind of like that.
Okay, we are going to talk about punk and hardcore now.
Awesome.
You ready for that?
Wait, let's do some backstory here. I'm going to provide it. I don't like discussing these things, and I give off that vibe, right?
Absolutely.
I have been pretty good about not doing it, and yet now I've written a book.
That's right.
About all of this stuff, and will thus have to discuss it.
You will have to.
That's my burden.
You've laid yourself out on the autopsy table and handed me a scalpel.
Okay.
What were some of the best zines in terms of actual good writing and editing that people might not have heard of?
Sick Teen is the one.
Yeah, tell me about Sick Teen.
Sick Teen was done by a guy calling himself Reverend Norb. He was in a band called Boris the Sprinkler, which I only know of because they're filed right next to Born Against in every record store, and I used to see it a lot when I would check record stores to see if they carried Born Against records. He did a column for Maximum Rock and Roll that wasn't great. As a writer, I think he went for that, I want to say gonzo, but I don't know enough about what that word means.
I think it's been abused and
it's almost meaningless at this point.
Yeah, I think it originally meant like, really deeply experiential stuff where the writer kind of like threw themselves with gusto into maybe sometimes dangerous or life-threatening experiences or something.
Okay,
like
yeah,
that.
this was not that. That's not what I'm talking about. When he's brilliant, he's really brilliant. 16 was done presumably on very large, I'm assuming 11 by 17 originals that were then shrunk down to fit into a little folded 8.5 by 11 fanzine. You could read it with a jeweler's loop. There's so many details and just little teeny tiny visual jokes in the corner. So he did one thing that is just my best thing, like a thing that I want printed and handed out at my funeral. And it's an examination of the emotional states of all the letter E's on the cover of Jimi Hendrix' Are You Experienced? And if you look at them, they all have different emotions. They're all little faces, and they're all conveying different thoughts.
Wow.
And it's just fucking brilliant. And the whole fanzine is just that. I don't know that you can, I only have, I think, 5 copies. He did an interesting thing at one point where he switched doing it on a typewriter to doing it on a computer. And clearly something was lost, but I'm not sure what. Same writing, same visual density.
Do you think he was still doing the same kind of like paste up on larger?
I think he was I think it was all digital.
Oh, well, that might be it.
Yeah, I guess.
You can feel the hand in things. I really think you can. Like a couple,
of course.
And
Sure.
that's probably what was lost.
Yeah. I attempted to do what he did with my fanzines and fell so thunderously short that it was really depressing for a while, that I would never be able to do what 16 did.
What were the year ranges that 16 was around?
Early 80s to, I want to say early 90s, but I'm not even sure.
You ever meet him?
No. Once I sent him a copy of Shooting Space, which was the semi-fictionalized tour diary of Men's Recovery Project that I made as a CD booklet sized fanzine. Like, we just had it printed through a CD booklet printer and no one knew what to make of it.
I loved it, and I'm a little scandalized to hear that it was semi-fictionalized. That bothers me. I didn't know that.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, there's hyperbole in it, but like, what?
I don't know. There's stuff like a truck passes and there's no one driving the truck.
I know, but I mean, things like that, sure.
Okay, all right. Well, some of it wasn't fictionalized.
Okay, all right.
Partially because bandmates had complained in Born Against that my tour diaries were factually incorrect, that I'd gotten things wrong, and it pissed me off so much that I just decided to do more and more of that. Anyway, I sent him a copy of Shooting Space, and I think I got a postcard that said, "Thanks," with a question mark or something. I was really happy and really sad at the same time.
Yeah.
Jigsaw, Toby Vale's fanzine, had a really big influence on me, and also a very big influence on the way Mutations is written. She would write essays on bands where she would just take a page and just write whatever she could think of about the band, including personal information, anecdotes. It's her fanzine. She could go in any direction she wanted. She wasn't constrained by any prior format.
Yeah.
And to me, that was always really neat. And forever, I was trying to figure out how to do something like that, and finally did it with this book, and more or less did it the way I wanted to, kind of, I guess. It's weird. I like this book a lot now, but I know I won't, because that's sort of my MO.
That's your pattern. You don't like things you've done.
I am incapable of liking previous art. And at this point, I've just come to learn to accept it. And also, I think it's a really good motivator. I'm so excited about the things I'm working on for the future. And that's always how I've been. Mm-hmm. So I don't really mind that.
So you've written this book, Mutations, it approaches in various ways hardcore and punk music.
Yeah.
Personal experience, pieces about bands, et cetera, et cetera. You, since I've known you, have been resistant to talking about those things. Why now? Why are you ready now?
Partially because I had already written a lot of it and just shelved it. There's one chapter about Born Against that I wrote a while ago and just decided not to do anything with it. I had some other pieces that I had shelved for one reason or another. God, I don't know. It's so hard it was such a grueling experience writing this book. It was so awful and unpleasant. It just turned into therapy.
Why? Because you were mining things that you felt embarrassed about?
Because I decided to really take the subject seriously in a way that I think I always have been, but haven't acknowledged to myself. I have a core group of friends, you included, who... Is there a conversation where we're not talking about the Cro-Mags or something like this stuff?
No,
comes up
all roads lead back to the
constantly.
Cro-Mags. Yeah.
And it's the same way like when I was a kid, all my conversations were about Star Wars. And so a lot of thought has gone into these things, but it became hard to do because the original concept for the book was just a collection of previously written essays. Mm-hmm. And at a certain point, I realized that would just not be a good book because there's very little that I've written in the past that I was satisfied with. Really just one piece, the Doc Dart piece I gave you.
Yeah.
The very first time I worked with you. That's the only thing that I've written where I'm like, awesome, that stands on its own.
So let's just so people know, you wrote a piece for me back at the magazine I used to edit about
back
Doc
when you
Dart.
worked at Vogue magazine.
Back when I was the editor of Vogue. About Doc Dart, the singer and lyricist of the Crucifix, and about him kind of going off the rails. I'm sure it's available online somewhere. Yeah. Well, it's in the book also.
And
now.
It's in the book.
Yeah.
And I didn't really need to do anything to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, I gave you the 8,000 word version. There is an 11,000 word version that I was going to put in the book. And then it wasn't necessary. Like we'd already addressed all the structural changes that needed to be made and it was good. I don't have anything else like that. I've done music writing for the OC Weekly and The Stranger and these magazines that frankly didn't expect sterling writing. You're doing deadline writing.
Yeah, sure.
And so the book became really exciting to me. Writing nonfiction became much more exciting to me when I realized that, like Jigsaw magazine, Jigsaw fanzine, I was not beholden to any rules about this material whatsoever. So I could go into an old piece and take the one sentence that I liked and move it somewhere else.
Right.
That I had all these bits and pieces that I needed to put together. And so that made it a real challenge, but it was a much, much bigger challenge than I thought it would be. And really just, like therapy, not fun having to address this stuff. And a lot of these are unpleasant memories for me.
What was the hardest piece? Which was the hardest piece in the book for you to write?
I don't know. There were some that were technically hard, some that...
Let's talk about emotionally hard, therapeutically difficult.
I guess the Born Against one. Sure.
Why are you so ashamed of Born Against?
Well, there were a lot of... Born Against was a bad time for me. I think it's interesting to me how much hardcore, which even... Like definitionally, there's a challenge because when I talk about hardcore, I'm talking about 80s hardcore. When people think about hardcore now, there are all these overlays.
Yeah.
90s hardcore, I guess Audi's hardcore.
I think it exists.
Yeah. There are all these other definitions of this thing. This word doesn't even really have a set definition. But for me, 1980s hardcore was entwined with mental illness. You were given this opportunity to use your mental illness in a way that was artistically explosive, but personally kind of damaging, not fun.
You mean for yourself?
I think for myself, but also others. I've recognized this in others. I've known a lot of hardcore frontmen, and everyone in that crowd were dudes. They were like,
yeah.
I write about the relationship that Born Against had with Bikini Kill, which was very nuanced. In general, I'm talking about guys who are encouraged to go around and scream at strangers, as I was, and to channel their neuroses and personal issues into art. And the whole genre became kind of fascinating to me once it was viewed that way. Like the Doc Dart piece, he's got some issues.
Through a lens of mental illness.
Yeah, through a lens of mental illness, yeah.
What were your mental illnesses when you were in Born Against?
I'm not sure what my medical definition was. Once Born Against ended, I didn't have a shield. I didn't have an outlet. I was just a mentally ill person. And so I had a lot of panic attacks in Born Against. Those got to be like a daily thing. You remember the scene in American Werewolf in London where he's reading a book and then, my God, and he throws, like, these were panic attacks that would hit me like that.
Wow.
Instantly, just a physical, malevolent force.
Wow.
And then after I had a dissociative panic attack, which apparently is the next step, it's just a drug trip. You've been dosed by your own brain and you just leave reality for a while. If you don't know what's happening, it's already really scary. And if you don't know that it's going to happen or what's happening while it's happening, or then after it's happened, what the fuck just happened,
right,
then you enter this period where you can't really tell what's real and what's not anymore. And so I was like that for a while, and that's not fun. All that stuff to me is tied up with Born Against. I get that it was a good band for what it did, but
so you're not,
doesn't mean I have to like it, you know?
Emotional issues aside, mental illness aside, that scene being fucked up in a lot of ways aside, do you like the music still that you made?
No, a little bit. There's a couple songs here and there that are good. Aren't most musicians like that? I'm surprised when I meet musicians and artists who aren't like that.
Yeah, most of the musicians I know they're okay with some of their stuff. They love some, they hate some. I think it's a spectrum. How did you get, this isn't even about books anymore, but I like it. How did you get out of that period after a dissociative panic attack? Therapy, medication, change of geography?
Yeah.
Like what, all the above?
Well, eventually, the short-term change of geography, it changed my life. Long-term, I would say therapy, hypnotherapy, antidepressants, and marijuana were the four big things that really turned me around.
Amen, brother.
It's just kind of turned like the Joe Rogan. Like, should we both have backwards baseball caps? You're wearing one. Wow.
I am guilty as charged.
Unbelievable.
Were there any literary influences on Born Against, on your lyrics, or your standpoint even?
Johnny Got His Gun by Dalton Trumbo is one of my favorite books.
Can you talk about that a little bit for people who don't know?
It's an anti-war book. Geez, I think it's written about World War I. It's been so long since I read it. It's devastating.
You know, it's hard for me to, I've read it, but I can't, it's hard for me to disentwine it from Metallica's One. You know what I mean?
Yes,
the video that has the film. So I forget which war it was, to be honest with
nice.
you. But go on.
There's a really interesting foreword by Dalton Trumbo. So Dalton Trumbo was one of the writers blacklisted during the Red Scare in the 1950s. He wrote this incredible, moving anti-war book told from the point of view of a war veteran who has lost all of his limbs and has been blinded and made deaf. And I think he's lost most of his face. So he's just a stump lying in the hospital.
Through like Morse code.
He figures out how to communicate through Morse code. Yeah, and that's not a good ending.
No.
He doesn't get answers that he wants. And it's just a devastating, amazing book that's pretty hard to read, but just really well done. So yeah, I think that had an influence on me. As one thing that's weird about Born Against, one of many things, is that I get credit for being the lyricist. All those lyrics were collaborations with Adam.
They were.
Yeah, I don't think I'm a great lyricist. Like Adam, I credit Adam with that band being what it was. I think maybe we both had these directions that we saw, and we were good at honing each other's instincts, but it's both amusing and frustrating to me in equal measure that I get credited and blamed for everything that band did.
Right.
To the point where I have had people refer to me as Born Against.
That's pretty good.
In this weird little netherworld of rumors that everyone gets about them if they do anything publicly, artistically. There's nothing unique about my experience. But that's the way that I've perceived whatever this other version of Sam McPheeters is who's out there in the world.
Wait, how does it work to write collaborative lyrics? Like with you and Adam,
I don't know. How does it work? I don't remember how it worked.
Would you sit in a room together and talk while you were doing it?
No, I don't think so. I think we give each other stuff, but it's the weirdest thing. I could never do that now. It's like writing a diary with someone.
That's really rare. I don't think anybody,
No, there must be.
I can't think. I mean, I've heard about I think Lennon and McCartney, one would throw a couple lines into another song if they felt stuck or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I honestly don't remember that much about our creative process, except that it was always very contentious. It was a real sibling kind of dynamic. And I'm sure we both made fun of each other's lyrics to each other's faces. Like we would get really brutal with
That
each
must
other.
have felt good.
Yeah, those were fun times.
Who's the best hardcore lyricist ever?
Oh, fuck. I know this.
Were those some lyrics you just did?
Yeah, I can tell you who's the worst.
Okay, do that first.
And that is fucking everyone who wrote lyrics for Husker Du. If you really read the lyrics for Husker Du, they are so miserable. I love those first records, but if I sit down and read the lyrics, I'm like, nope, I'm done. I'm never listening to this band again.
But quote me some bad Husker Du lyrics.
The lyrics to, is it real world? People don't do things like that in the real world at all. It's a defense of being a couch potato. It's like an angry defense of someone sitting on their couch, yelling out the reasons why they don't want to engage with the world. Good lyrics, all of them. All of them are good lyrics. All the blue chip hardcore bands, Black Flag, Bad Brains, Minor Threat, Circle Jerks, all of them were good. And the key to writing good lyrics is that they're not going to look amazing on paper.
Right.
You need to hear them in the context of the song.
Yeah.
Articles of Faith, Vic Bondi, just a sterling lyricist. He was a huge influence on Born Against to the point where I think Adam really felt that I needed to tone it down a bit. I remember once I played a prank on him where he came over and I'd written a bunch of lyrics, but just left them out on a table, and they were all like Articles of Faith lyrics. I just like changed a few words on.
Yeah.
And I'd already told him, like, man, I'm really excited to show you these new lyrics, but you know, whatever. And then I just like left them and went in the other room and got a drink.
That's pretty good. What about Cro-Mags lyrics? How do you feel about those?
On the first record, very comfortable.
The only record.
Really good. The only really kind of the only record ever. Really comfortable, really good.
Yeah.
Don't agree with any of them, I think. Doesn't matter. As an entertainment franchise, on par with Harry Potter or James Bond, the Cro-Mags continue to deliver.
They deliver, but it's interesting because the best stuff they've put out since Age of Quarrel has been the behind-the-scenes stories. You know, the music, no.
Which is fine. Which is totally fine.
I think it's great. Maybe it was even planned. Maybe the real life became the art.
Maybe it was planned. Wink.
Yeah. Who before you, obviously, because you've done it very well, has written well about music? Who do you like to read on, not even, I mean, maybe punk specifically, but any kind of music writing?
The three music books that I really like, one's the obvious one, Lester Bangs. And do you like Carburetor Dung?
I don't.
Yeah,
but, I haven't tried since high school. Maybe I should try again.
I mean, it's a super acquired taste, and I get it if you don't like him. But he wrote one essay in that whole, I like the whole book, but there's the essay, The White Noise Supremacists, where he totally goes after the racism in that scene, the very early CBGB scene.
Yeah.
And he pissed off a lot of people who were friends of his, and he didn't care. And it's just a really interesting, well put together and extremely self-reflective essay where he takes himself to task as well for being part of this extremely racist subgenre.
I remember there's a sort of famous photo of him wearing an ironically racist T-shirt.
Yeah. I think he goes after himself for wearing that. Yeah, only a couple of years later. And he hopefully just eviscerates, oh God, what's her face? Horses, come on.
Patti Smith.
Yeah, Patti Smith.
For her song.
For her song.
That uses the N-word.
Yeah. Which I think is kind of despicable. I really don't care for her as an artist or a person. Because of that song.
That's it.
No, there's other stuff. I think she's just, if you read about her in Please Kill Me or other accounts, she just is not, she's not someone I would ever want to know as a person. I get that a lot of people have been inspired by her and that's cool, but they're seeing something that I don't.
I get that. I probably agree with the stuff you're talking about. I like a few songs a lot, and I don't like much of them at all.
Yeah. Blues People is incredible, which you've read?
No.
By Leroy Jones, who
Blues
became
People.
Mary Baraka. Yeah.
No.
Can I just go get it off the shelf?
No, you don't. That's cheating. So Sam wants to go to the other room in his house here and pick up books. But no, you can't.
Anyway, Blues People's incredible. You should read it.
Tell me, is it about blues musicians?
It's just about blues musicians, and it is socially contextualizing how frustration and simmering resentment and just having to live day to day with the humiliations of white supremacy, how that was filtered into this art form. There's a lot more to it.
Yeah.
It is a book that when I finished it was like, awesome, I'm going to come back to this in 10 years and I'm going to get even more out of it. It's a pretty short read. It's incredible. And then
Well, 1 second, just so people know, that's by Leroy Jones, who eventually changed his name to Amiri Baraka.
Are you sure, or can I go check?
Well, you're telling me that.
May I go check?
Sam, go get the book. So Sam is back from his office, his home office, and he has the book, and it looks like it is indeed by Leroy Jones.
Yep.
That's spelled Leroi, Jones. Later, he changed his name to Amiri Baraka. He was a great beat poet and playwright. Well, he transcended beat, but he kind of came up with some of them.
Yeah. It's a very serious book. I don't remember there being much humor in it.
I don't remember him being funny ever, really.
Okay, yeah.
Didn't really go for funny.
Yeah, his comedy career kind of fizzled out.
Yeah.
And then the third book is the one that came out just a few years ago by David Byrne.
Oh, yeah, How Music
Works. Yeah,
that was good?
I think that's what it's called. It's weird. It's great. And really, that was an influence behind Mutations as well, even though I was reading it while I was writing it. Just the way that he writes about music. It's not what you would expect. Like, what would you expect from a book like that?
Well, my expectations would be based on it being David Byrne.
Mm-hmm.
I think that my prejudices against him would make me expect something kind of clinical and arch and ironic and weirdly stilted. Like, I really like the movie True Stories, actually, the movie he made, but...
Everyone says that. I've never seen it.
It's good.
Okay.
Yeah, I would expect something kind of clinically distant and without much warmth.
Well, I could see that, and I think that's... Yeah, it's probably that.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. It's just a really interesting take on music. Boy, I'm not selling this. There's a great section in The Conversations, which is a collaboration between the novelist and poet Michael Ondaatje, who wrote The English Patient, which was just a weirdly very profound book for me.
Kudos on the pronunciation, by the way.
Yeah, what, I mangle it?
No, I think you got it right.
Sidebar, this is the nature of the relationship between me and Jesse's. I constantly think he's being sarcastic with me, and I guess he's not.
I get that a lot.
This whole thing that we have feels like a super long con.
I think that's coming from you only.
Like you're getting the routing number for my soul somehow.
No, I think that you pronounced his name right. I love, there was a piece, I think, in The Believer, like 10 years ago or so, or maybe more, that showed you how to pronounce difficult author last names.
Oh, that's amazing.
And I was really grateful for that.
Yeah.
That's how I learned that it's Chabon, Michael Chabon. Or, I don't know, I can't remember any others. But anyway, tell me...
Oh, all right, so The Conversations is literally just transcripts of conversations between him and the film editor Walter Murch, who edited The Godfather and what else? The English Patient. I think both Godfather movies.
So wait, this is in the David Byrne book?
No, this is a separate book.
Oh, okay.
All right, the book is called The Conversations.
Okay.
Have you not heard of this?
No.
Yeah, it's really, really good. Okay. And it's just these two guys talking about film. And there's a whole section where Walter Murch talks about when he was a young man, he had some function, I don't know if it was a job or something, where he had to listen to, I think, 15th century music. And he did this every day for maybe a month, for a period of time. And it made all modern music, meaning anything even from like the 17th century, sound bizarre and atonal to him. And the way that he just discussed, he can't even say right because it's a transcript, but the way that he just discussed music to me was really interesting. And again, it got back to that thing from Jigsaw Fanzine where you can approach this material any way you want. You're not bound by any convention. And this material, the punk and hardcore stuff, is important enough that you should do that. You should not take this lightly because everyone I know, including me, this has been the signal thing in their life. I'm lucky enough I've had a few other things where this was like the thing. Mm-hmm. But to this day, my experience in those worlds, I'm using that plural because I was part of a bunch of very different scenes.
Yeah.
those still were, I can't say defining, but just very profound things for me. And this material warrants being looked at, being taken as seriously as possible. Doesn't mean that the writing has to be serious. The thing is, hopefully there's a lot of humor in my writing.
Yeah, there is.
And I try and make it very easy breezy and not academic. But I'm also trying to make it clear to the reader that I take all this extremely seriously. And I think that was definitely my MO in Born Against, is I take everything really seriously. Therefore, I'm going to say some things you're not going to like.
Yeah.
That didn't always work out for me.
Yeah. I mean, I think maybe the fact that you do take it so seriously might have something to do with why it took you so long to write about it.
Oh, right. That's another big part of the pie chart. I wouldn't have been able to write about this even 5 years ago.
So really quickly, I want to know, because I haven't read it or seen the movie, why is The English Patient good? What's it about?
It is several entwined stories taking place during World War II. The English Patient is an explorer, a desert explorer. In the book and in the movie, I think they're in Libya, and then war breaks out and they have to abandon their explorations. The language is just, it's the kind of language that I have read it only from a few other authors. John Updike, now Toni Morrison, Lolita, which Lolita, the book and the movie, I found kind of fucking despicable. But it doesn't, in a way, artistically, it doesn't matter because the language is
it's
so
stunning.
Stunning. It's just you have to stop reading it and just like take a break.
Yeah, it's like a rich meal. Like you have to kind of breathe sometimes.
And for me, I have to disengage the part of my brain that has any aspirations of being a writer when I read those books, because I will never be able to write like those people. Michael Ondaatje definitely does that in The English Patient. I've read most of his other books, his prose books. I'm not going to read his poetry. That came close, but didn't hit that level. The Conversations is the only other thing that I would recommend that would be on the same level as English Patient. And again, maybe it's an acquired taste. A lot of it's the language, not the story.
Okay. I'll pick it up next time I'm in a bookstore and see if it works for me. You just mentioned Toni Morrison, and I think based on your Instagram stories lately, and something you told me too once, you've just started reading her now, right?
Yeah.
But you had the chance to sort of meet her at one point.
Oh, I blew it. Yeah.
Tell me that story real quickly.
When I lived in Albany, New York, in this brownstone, the brownstone next door to ours was the home of my best friend, Pete, for a long time. Then he moved out, and a couple years later, Toni Morrison moved in. I knew that house really, really well until I was kicked out by his mom. At a certain point, I couldn't go over there anymore because things would get broken. And so Pete would have to come to my house. But I knew that house as well as I knew my own. Toni Morrison moved to Albany because she was friends with William Kennedy, also a Pulitzer Prize winner. Ironweed. Another great book.
Amazing book.
Of just language where you're like, what? How did a person write this? Yeah. And so my plan, I was already a published author at that point. When I was 12, I co-authored a book of folklore stories about the greater Albany area.
Traveler's Tales. I'm very proud to own a copy of that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I have one.
I haven't read it since I was a kid. How does it read?
It reads well. It's well written, but it just has like a piece of sort of history or knowing what's behind it.
Yeah.
So you and an adult friend of yours co-wrote that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Long, interesting, convoluted story that we probably don't have time for.
Save it for an appendix episode one day.
Yeah. So I had that going for me. Plus, I don't know how I knew this, but she and I were both born in Lorain, Ohio, which is not a big city. So I had these two big talking points. Yeah. Plus, we're neighbors. Yeah. Plus, I know your house, blah, blah, blah. And the neighborhood the house was in is called Mansion Hill, which sounds kind of hoity-toity, and I'm sure it was at one point during the 20th century. It was pretty downtrodden when we moved in there. Looks a lot like Sesame Street. There is part of the hill that Mansion Hill is named after cut into or formed the backyard for these buildings. So the backyard sloped upwards kind of absurdly. So she was standing at the back of her backyard and thus much higher than me. So I'm walking towards her and up to go make my introduction. And she turned around and looked at me, and it was like if all four heads on Mount Rushmore looked at you. It was so intimidating.
Right.
I was just, and I turned around and went back in, and I never saw her again. And I
How old were you?
Blew it. I was trying to figure it out. 13, 14, I think.
And so after having that experience, why did you wait so long to read her books?
Probably mostly because I'm not a quick reader and I just didn't get around to it.
Okay. So you've now read which one?
Only Jazz.
And tell me about it. I haven't read it.
It was one of the best books I've ever written.
What's it about?
It is several lives that sort of circle around a murder in 1920s Harlem, but she really jumps back and forth. And as a reader, you learn about 50 pages in to really trust her instincts. There are things that are referenced where it made me doubt myself. Oh, did I already read about this character a couple pages ago? What's she doing? And then she brings it around. And so you just learn to trust her, which is a really powerful skill. I don't think many writers have.
Yeah.
I don't trust myself a lot as a reader. I constantly feel like my retention is low. I'm really, really bad at remembering characters' names.
Yeah, me too.
All the time in movies, I have to ask my wife, who's Linda? She's like, oh, that's the protagonist.
Right.
You know, this movie's called Linda's Tale. Catch up. So fortunately, she only wrote maybe a dozen books, so I'll be able to read them all in my lifetime. That to me was a really nice discovery.
Why don't I like John Updike?
He's kind of insufferable.
Yeah.
He writes about sex and adultery to an absurd degree. He also, through the lens of the 20 teens and whatever version of woke culture you and I are operating in, he looks really out of date and kind of bad.
Yeah.
I read him for the language. I'm aware that sounds a little bit like a cop-out, but I don't care. I read him as a writer.
I understand.
And there is one really invaluable tool that I learned from his writing that allowed me to write fiction, and that is that all words, unless they're like articles, verbs, nouns, everything has dual meanings, and you can assign multiple meanings to the same thing. So, for example, you have this microphone pointed at you. Well, that's a reminder that I need to watch what I'm saying because this is being recorded and being listened to by people I don't know and probably will never meet. But also it could remind me of an incident with a microphone years ago, or maybe the microphone is a symbol to me of my failed days as a band leader and aspirations I had, or maybe the shape of the microphone reminds me of a dick joke, or I can go in any direction I want with that. Everything is like that. And that, to me, is how people think and how people operate.
Associatively.
Yeah, that there is constant, vigorous contextualizing of everything.
Yeah.
The words that we're saying, the objects in front of us, the clothes that we're wearing, the situations we're in, and that all those things can be used. That's part of your toolkit as a writer. Mm-hmm. So up until I read John Updike, I had tried and failed to write a lot of fiction, short stories. I had this whole sad period when I lived in Jersey City. So the last year of Born Against, we lived in another townhouse, but a really shabby one, just like linoleum floors. It was just gross. This is in Jersey City.
I've lived there. I think it's really whatever. It's better now, but it used to be fun.
Yeah, it was a bummer.
Yeah.
But I had a view of the Twin Towers out my window. I bought like my first comfortable chair that I was going to read books in. All right, this is it. I'm going to be a reader. I had my little desk, and I failed. I would try and read, and then I'd be woken up like by drool coming out of my mouth at 4 a.m. with, on page 4 of like a Mark Twain book. Yeah. And I would try and write these short stories, and I would just end in tears because I didn't know how to do it. So I feel like I have that debt to John Updike as a writer, the same way that Anne Druyan, I believe is her last name. She's one of the scientists, one of the NASA engineers who compiled material for the gold records that went out on the 2 Voyager spacecrafts.
Oh, yeah, cool.
She included a Beethoven piece, sonata, I don't know, a recording of music by Beethoven as her way of repaying a debt to Beethoven. That's how I feel about John Updike. If you're not into it, like I get it on many levels.
I want to be totally honest. I think it might just be that his face bugs me.
Ah, okay.
Tell me, I've tried reading.
I have that
I've read
with other
few.
people.
Like who? Name one.
Bill Maher. His fucking face. Fuck his face.
John Updike's face bugs me, but also the way he uses it bugs me. He's always making a "look at me" kind of expression.
It's a very smug expression. Yeah. My feeling, just, I know we got to move on, but like, if you can deliver the goods, then you've earned it. You know, like Neil Armstrong could have come back and just be like, "Hey, I'm at the supermarket. Cool. I'm going to take a piss in the vegetable aisle."
Yeah, that would be amazing.
And everyone would be like, "Cool, you're Neil Armstrong. Whatever.
Piss anywhere."
Yeah.
What should I read by Updike? I've read some stuff already, but what's your favorite?
All 4 of the Rabbit books are really good.
Yeah, but I don't want to read 4 books.
Yeah. Well, you could read any of them.
You can really jump in anywhere on them?
Yeah, you don't need to know the backstory.
Oh, I didn't know
the
that.
last one, Rabbit at Rest, is really good. He wrote one science fiction novel that I really liked. It's got an incredibly unforgettable title. Towards the Edge of Time. It's something like that. You can Google science fiction novel. It's set in 2020 after there's been a limited nuclear war between the US and China, and the government is sort of getting itself back together. It's funny that he really went for it because it doesn't read like a science fiction novel at all. It's a John Updike novel about a white wealthy guy living in New England and his various affairs.
Yeah.
But then every now and then he'll throw in stuff about the space station where everyone died and it's just floating and everyone has to look at it. Or
that's cool.
There's this weird new artificial life form of these little creatures that will attack people and eat them from the feet up. And survivors have said that it was like being fed into a industrial shredder. And then there's an incredible bit with the government where you figure out slowly that FedEx and UPS are vying for control of the government.
Oh, wow.
And so at the end, the FedEx guy shows up, and the only difference is that he's armed now. And he says, well, between you and me, we're going to let UPS come to us. We're going to meet them, and they're going to bring the battle to us, but we're feeling good about it.
So there's going to be a war, like
a war between FedEx and UPS. And John Updike is such a good writer that at no point are you like, this is bullshit.
Yeah.
Like,
that's great.
Wow. Yeah, it's really good. I would try that. I think
I will. That sounds like it would appeal to me. Tell me about poetry.
You're never going to meet anyone who hates poetry as much as me. Fuck poetry in the face. Okay. I want you to defend poetry to me because I don't understand it.
That would be like defending fiction. Okay. It's too broad and varied a thing to do that too. But
all right,
go ahead.
So do you get, as a poetry lover, as a poetry aficionado?
I majored in poetry.
Okay.
I mean, as much as you can at a school that doesn't have majors.
Right. Do you get that there are people like me who despise poetry and don't understand and hate and fear it?
Very much so.
Okay. I wish I liked poetry, but I don't know how to get into it. It doesn't make any sense to me. I feel strongly that I failed as a lyricist because I do not understand poetry. Poetry to me feels like going to see someone's noise band. Here's my argument. So this is what I want to know. I want to know if any of this resonates with you. Music is essentially an emotional language. You are trying to convey emotions to people instead of ideas. Mm-hmm. You would agree with that somewhat?
I'll go with it.
Okay. There was a time in the 90s hardcore world where everyone was very big on music as communication. Music's about communication. And
like a political agenda kind of thing. Yeah.
And that always read wrong to me.
But you did some of that.
Well, but the things that I have done musically we're coming at it from the artistic perspective. This is art that I'm trying to make, not necessarily an emotion that I'm trying to convey to you. Yeah, I'm aware I wouldn't say I'm being hypocritical, but I'm being inconsistent. Sure, yeah, I did traffic in some of that.
Okay.
But in general, musicians are trying to convey emotions, not ideas. That's what poetry feels like to me. Someone is trying to convey an interior emotion. And all of it, to me, reads as self-indulgent as the worst noise band. I know that's wrong. So how do I
don't know how to even approach this. First of all, music, let's go with your idea that the primary, goal of it is to convey emotion, right? That's not all it has to do. You can spend your time taking the first impact of it, and that's an emotional impact for you. But then you look at the lyrics, you're like, wow, look what he's talking about. It's funny, it's sad, whatever. You're saying there's only one way to take something in.
I'm saying there's only one way I am capable of taking it in, and it bums me out.
That's not true, though. Let's go back to the Alpha and the Omega, the Cro-Mags. You can take in the visceral impact. Then you also can either be amused
If
or
I
something
saw
by the
someone
words.
doing a public reading of their lyrics, that would be absurd.
Love it.
I almost did that once with a different New York hardcore band. I'm glad that I didn't, because it would have been a very antagonistic move.
Which band?
Just a band.
Oh, come
from
on.
New
Which
York.
band?
Just a band of dudes. I'm not answering
Agnostic
this question.
Front.
Not Agnostic Front.
Madball.
Not Agnostic
It was
Front or
Madball.
Madball. It was not either of those. Anyway, yeah, I was going to do a public reading of their lyrics as if it was like slam poetry. And I think that would have been hilarious and also just not a good move for me personally. And I'm glad that I didn't do it. I did so much needlessly antagonistic stuff back then. Why? What was wrong with me that I would do all that?
You tell me. You were angry, super angry. I don't know why.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Poetry, Jesus, man, I don't know. There's so many different types of poetry and approaches to writing it. There are the poems that are self-indulgent pap, for sure. There are the poems that are needlessly riddle-like, which I don't like, where you have to try to figure something out before you can. I don't like having to work in that way. But most of the poetry that I like is very straightforward. If you took it and broke it out of its, stanza format, it could just read as like a letter to someone half the time.
Okay, so who would you recommend like that?
Joe Brainerd is a great one. Have you read Joe Brainerd?
No, of course not.
Okay, look at his book called I Remember.
Okay.
So Joe Brainerd's book, I Remember, which I hope a lot of these our listeners know, is just a book-length thing where it's a bunch of entries, and each one starts I Remember, and then it's just some random evocative memory from either yesterday or from when he was a child. But that, I think, more than a lot of other books, is an entryway into poetry and can also show you what poetry can do emotionally.
I will read that book.
Anyway, to wrap up the poetry discussion, fuck you.
Okay.
I don't know. You seem like you're coming from a place of being defensive because you don't get it.
Yeah, I'm explicitly saying that to you.
Okay,
I'm defensive and angry because I don't get it. I am like the caveman who sees the spaceship and hurls a coconut at it in rage.
I love that guy.
Yeah.
Okay. So you recently started smoking pot.
Yeah.
How old were you when you started? 48?
I was straight edge until I was 46.
Nothing.
I had gotten tipsy a few times.
Let's focus on pot.
Okay.
Because alcohol is for Neanderthals.
You keep telling me that.
I mean, I like it too, but it's not not leaning toward the better angels.
Yeah,
Let's put it
that's
way.
true. I found that.
So you started smoking pot. Knowing you, I'm going to guess that you did some research first.
Not as much as I should have.
What did you read? How did you research marijuana before you got
just Googling things.
That's all.
Yeah, I haven't read.
Have you read any books about drug experiences?
Not yet. I am reading my way through one of the main DMT books.
Oh, a nonfiction book.
A nonfiction book.
Yeah.
But no, that wasn't part of my. I know you've had other podcasts where you've talked about people's formative teenage books and books they read when they got into punk, like the Beats. That was never part of my experience.
Yeah, I wouldn't guess that.
So no, I never was part of that literature. And a weird thing that I experienced in that first year before full legalization in California was I would go to my dispensary, and the part of my brain that makes fun of potheads is still there.
Sure.
So I'm watching people in line and mocking them in my head, like, "Ooh, I'll have a quarter of Purple Wizard," yeah. And then get to the counter and it's a switch. Oh, yes, I'd like a quarter of Purple Wizard, please. Yeah. And didn't matter because everyone there was stoned out of their mind.
Yeah.
Found several things with this that I did not expect. One is that it's helped me immensely with writing. It basically gives me a second set of eyes on all writing.
Yeah, that's amazing because I can't read or write stoned effectively. So tell me about that. Do you write a first draft and read it high?
If I read things when I'm high, I notice, it's weird. This is going to sound strange. I notice falsity, things that aren't correct. This is not an example of that, but this is an example of the kind of falsity that I'm talking about. I'd written, I think on my blog, this account of when I was with Joe Preston in Virginia, and these cops came out of nowhere and shoved me up against a van because it was just some weird coincidence. Somebody had robbed something and I fit a description. And I'd written in the piece that they pulled a gun on me, and they were dicks, but they hadn't pulled a gun on me. And I just sort of like let my mind get wiggly, like get loose with that pretty pertinent fact.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing on a much smaller level. When I'm stoned, I can look and be like, oh, that didn't happen. That's not correct. That's not how I feel about that. I need to unpack this.
Sure.
I have more to say about this subject. I'm not doing it correctly. And it's what a good editor should do. And I'm able to function as a good editor when doing that. When writing stoned, most of it's garbage, obviously. But when it's not, it's usually pretty good stuff. And I can come up with weird observations that I just wouldn't be able to access otherwise.
Have you ever been helped by a self-help book?
Oh, yeah.
Tell me about some of those.
Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
What's that?
Just what it sounds like. Just a shitty self-help business book.
I thought it was about like you having shitty dads.
No. It's a business book. It's about a guy had his biological dad was the poor dad who hopefully didn't read the fucking book, because I'm sure he was bummed out about it. And then his rich dad was this mentor who took him on. And there was a really interesting thing in there about how everyone should be receptive to just getting information. There's a whole thing in there where he says very few people will approach successful people asking for information. Usually, successful people are accustomed to being asked for favors or loans or just money outright.
Right.
And that it's very valuable if you identify people with skills in your life and just get information from them. How did you do this? How'd you do that? Well, how does this function? And I've been doing that a lot more since I read that book. 95% of the book is garbage. I've read a bunch of business books that's the ratio. You got to find the 5% that works. How to Speak Money, Winning Through Intimidation.
That's a good one. What's that? Tell me about that one.
It's just a crazy book from the 70s with these really awful illustrations of a turtle that don't really have anything to do with the thing, but it's all just about business negotiations, and if you're bluffing, don't have it be a bluff. There's certain lessons in there that made sense to me.
Yeah.
I don't play cards because I'm a terrible bluffer and I love bluffing, but I'm really not good at it. And so this was sort of a new take on that. I have a hard time imagining there are any business books that aren't worth reading if you read it knowing that you're looking for the little bits. You know, you had talked before with other guests on your podcast about books that they had abandoned, and I really don't ever like putting a book down. I'll give a book one session.
Yeah.
And if I'm into it, then I'll stick with it. And especially with fiction, I think there's a value in that. I read Lady Chatterley's Lover by Lawrence and despised it. It's just a despicable book.
Yeah.
But I think it was a good skill for me to learn how to get through that book. And there's information in there about how people felt about the Industrial Revolution and what it did to the English countryside that I wouldn't have known. And part of my goal as a reader is to extract that information from a book that is otherwise not worth my time.
What about on a stylistic level? Do you learn something about your own writing craft by reading writing that you don't like?
Oh, of course, all the time. Yeah.
You learn what not to do?
Yeah. There's a really interesting writer. His pen name is David Wong. He's not Asian. That's another thing that problematic in this decade for good reason. He is a comedy writer. He wrote John Dies at the End, was made into the movie.
I've
what's
heard
his face?
of that. I don't know.
I haven't read that yet, but I read his other book, What the Hell Did I Just Read, or What the Hell Just Happened? It's really interesting. He's an awful writer. I mean, he's terrible. It's a hilarious book. Like, I was crying with laughter. Even at the same time, there are characters in there that just show up. Like, it's so abysmal. And so I get that someone can have a lot of value as a writer beyond not being a good writer.
Okay.
That was a really interesting read for me. And I'm looking forward to, I'm saving John Dies at the End for maybe a vacation or something. Cause I read the first page and it's so just like tears rolling down your face with laughter.
I read that. I'll have to go back and look. I don't remember anything about it. That reminds me, though, before I forget, there is a writer I've always wanted to recommend to you if I haven't yet, and he's it's humor. John Swartzwelder. Do you know him?
Only by name. Only through you.
I've mentioned him before.
Yeah.
He was a really, one of the better writers for The Simpsons when The Simpsons was good. He's a big recluse. There's only like 2 photos of him.
Yeah.
He's from outside Pittsburgh, but he wrote a series of sort of science fiction humor books that just don't adhere to any kind of plot or logic at all.
Yeah.
But it's just joke, and they're really funny.
Yeah.
I think I would start with the one titled Earth versus Everybody.
Oh.
I mean, that's a title.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, before I forgot that. Jigsaw fanzine came up a few times. Has that ever been collected? Like the way you collected your zine, Dear Jesus?
Not that I know of. No.
So I think there are probably a lot of zines that should get that treatment. Could there be a sick teen book? Does it lend itself to that or no?
Yeah, of course. I'd love to do that. Touch and Go fanzine did that. I know Triple X just did that. I think a lot of the lesser 80s and 90s music zines, especially ones that came out post Youth Crew, which means that there was a very specific aesthetic to it.
Can you define Youth Crew for like my aunt?
Sure. Youth Crew, which I write about in Mutations, was a stylistic endpoint to punk. So punk happened in the mid-70s, exploded 76, 77. The Youth Crew, I inadvertently had a front row seat to the formation of, because Youth of Today came through Albany a lot and were friends with the people who put on shows in Albany. And they brought about a stylistic change where people would listen to very aggressive music that would read as punk music to 99.99% of the planet.
Yeah.
But the people didn't look like punks. They had a very...
I called it varsity punk.
Yeah, it's very varsity themed.
Champions
varsity
sweatshirts.
jackets, a lot of brand identity. If you know about the music is very generic. There is a certain type of collegiate font that was favored.
Right.
And it meant a whole series of aesthetic, stylistic changes to that scene that meant that fanzines just weren't that interesting anymore. There were rules. There were even more than rules. There was precedent.
Yeah.
So Sick Teen operated like there was no precedent. There's no logical precursor to Sick Teen. It's like how Johnny Rotten described his big influence as a performer was Laurence Olivier as Richard III, I think.
Oh, wow.
Is that the Hunchback one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is. A horse, my kingdom for a horse.
Yeah, and so that's what he was doing because he didn't have any rock performers
I can see
ape.
That. Yeah.
And so then everyone else got to be Johnny Rotten. They got to do him the same way that when, as a performer, I was just doing my impression of other performers, specifically photos of other performers, something that I also write about in Mutations.
Yeah.
There was a certain theatrical quality that I was trying to ape as a performer.
Yeah.
I didn't really do it correctly. A lot of it is, what's the word? Vamping, voguing?
Vamping.
If you look at performances of Black Flag with Henry Rollins, he's just doing a series of poses. Like it looks very different in photographs.
Yeah.
He has constructed this performance persona that consciously or unconsciously is designed for photography.
It's kind of like how bodybuilders do their flex routine at competition.
Yeah. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's a good thing.
It looks really cool.
It's a theatrical element to this art form that there were just traces of it by the time I got involved. And the Youth Crew dramatically changed, along with a lot of other things. The Youth Crew is one little series of scenes in a world that had many other scenes.
Yeah.
But there was a stylistic switch there from the confrontational poses to evangelical poses, where instead of eyes wide open, making eye contact with different members of the audience as if you're going to physically attack them, or maybe are physically attacking them, to closing your eyes and pointing a finger up towards the heavens.
Yeah.
And that had a series of ramifications, for the art. These are words I tried to not use in my writing. Ramification. That's a much too large a word for me to use as a writer. Yeah.
Anyway, and also if we're talking about zines being collected, we should remember that Aaron Comet Bus has done a couple.
Aaron Comet Bus is interesting for so many reasons, and also Aaron and I have a chapter in my book, I should mention, based off that book, The Conversations that I was talking about with Walter Murch and Michael Ondaatje. Aaron is interesting partially to me because is it possible for any one human being to read all of his work at this point?
Probably not, because some of it doesn't exist anymore. That's one practical reason. Yeah, probably not. Well, I don't know. I could if I really wanted to. I mean, whatever's available. I
mean, I look forward to attempting it over the course of my life. But again, I'm very conscious of working with a normal human lifespan.
Yeah.
Like if I get to be 100, I'm not going to be reading until I'm 100.
Well, all you got to do is read Comet Bus and Toni Morrison for the rest of your life.
Okay, all right.
You're kind of fascinated by the Revolutionary War era, right?
Yes, but with an asterisk. I feel like there are a lot of eras, subjects that I need to create excuses for me to really research. I had that 15 years ago with the Ottoman Empire. I wrote this thing I never did anything with. And there was a period where I really could hold my own in a conversation about interest rates in mid-18th century Ottoman Empire.
That comes up all the time.
You'd be shocked. So now there are other things like the Revolutionary War where I'm conscious of I need to make an excuse, an artistic reason for myself to keep researching that. So I have that thing. I don't know when I'll be done with it. It's fine. There's no.
It seems to have been a long. I mean, you did the Patrick Henry record, right?
Yeah, that there was a different motive behind that.
Let's before we get into it, remember that our aunts are listening. So tell us what the Patrick Henry record was.
So the Patrick Henry record was a 5-inch record that I recorded and released on my record label Vermiform of me doing Patrick Henry's "Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death" speech. I would also recite that speech in costume at shows that my band Men's Recovery Project did, often eating shit and yelling "line," which was a joke that I'm the only one who really appreciated in the moment. Sometimes just running out of the building if I couldn't remember it. I did that because I had just seen it. My dad came down to visit and we went, and it was just like breathtaking. It was in the church where it happened, and everybody was just like stunned.
Yeah.
And then later, maybe a week later, I was looking for something to do because I was so concerned about what a fuck up I was and mistakes I was making with my life that were really unforced errors and how bad my memory was getting. And I thought, well, I'm going to challenge myself this way. Here's a really interesting thing to do that no one's done before.
Yeah.
I'll do this.
Yeah.
And also I was getting flack for being in whatever Men's Recovery Project was from Born Against fans who saw me doing this thing that was completely apolitical. And I felt like you're getting a raw dose here, buddy. This is like
give it to you.
This is the uncut shit.
Yeah.
Are you even ready to accept this?
But you kind of delivered it. I mean, I know that those things were delivered with a lot of passion when they originally happened, but you delivered it kind of like a hardcore singer. And I saw it once.
Where'd you see it?
Springfield, Massachusetts.
Huh.
Scared the shit out of me. But it also felt like you were drawing a line between that kind of, what do you call it? Speechifying.
Yeah.
And punk singing.
Huh. The original speech, as the reenactor did it in Richmond, was pretty goddamn fiery.
He was screaming?
Yeah.
Yeah. But so, you did that a long time ago.
Okay, so I did that a long time ago. And maybe one thing that got me interested in the Revolutionary War was, man, wearing that suit, you could do anything. If you have one of those, you could go rob a bank and like no cop would dare stop you.
Yeah.
And then at a show in Oregon, a hand reached out from the audience and grabbed the neck ruffle called the jabot, I think.
I don't know.
The neck ruffle. And it was like all the power. It was like Tony Stark's heart nuclear heart thing got taken out of the Iron Man suit, all the power went out of the suit.
Right.
And I spent like 6 hours in San Francisco tracking one of these down and found it. And as soon as I put it back on, it was like,
You just grew a few inches.
Yep.
Yeah. That's crazy.
But this is the last thing about the Revolutionary War. I've been reading.
No, it's not actually. But go ahead.
Very slowly, the letters of George Washington. I had a period where I was just reading 5 pages a day over breakfast. And once you really get into those are just incredible. You could just go forever on that guy. He was so complex and such a weirdo.
I think people kind of cast him as being like the John Adams miniseries on HBO and other things I've seen. Cast Washington as being like not as intelligent as some of his peers.
Yeah. And he was self-conscious about his intelligence, and I think he kind of fostered that a little bit. He also was obviously a great delegator. And also the thing to remember about all these guys, like they were all sons of bitches. They were fuckers.
Oh, yeah.
And remember that guy in Ohio who kept 3 women in his basement for 10 years? That's what many of these guys did. Like they kept people in bondage and didn't allow them to have lives.
Yeah.
The best book, one of my absolute favorite books, Uncle Tom's Cabin by Stowe. You read it?
I don't think I have.
It's an amazing book. I mean, it definitely the writer has a lot of the prejudices of her time. Like it would be read now as a racist book, but it's also a hardcore abolitionist book.
Yeah.
And there's parts of it that read just like a horror story. And I think it's really easy for modern civilized Americans to just lose sight of what slavery was, what it meant. There's a character in Uncle Tom's Cabin who is never allowed friends. Like that's against the rules.
Yeah.
Obviously no family. So it's a life sentence, solitary confinement. I mean, he works, he lives with other people, but he's not allowed to have any interaction with them. And that's his life. And then he died.
That's horror.
And that's it. It's straight up horror. And that's what George Washington did.
Yeah.
Like he kept a bunch of people the same way a serial killer would.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to me to keep that in mind. Like humans are complex enough characters. They can be fucking monsters and also really intelligent, bizarre characters as well. Where was I going with that thought?
Well, you kind of were leading me to my final Revolutionary War question, which is I'd like you to talk a little bit about the book that you wrote and that has never seen the light of day, Town Destroyer, I believe it was called. Is that right?
No, it's not a book. It's a movie script.
It's a movie script, Town Destroyer.
I haven't written it yet. That's what I'm working on.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
I thought that was written and you sort of let it go.
No, I'm doing research.
Can we talk about Town Destroyer a little
I
bit?
mean, no, but we are, so that's cool. Town Destroyer was George Washington's nickname. I believe the Iroquois gave him.
Yeah, it was in their own language. I forget how it went in their own language.
He would go and destroy towns. That's the kind of guy he was.
Literally level a town.
Yeah.
Leave nothing.
Just like, hey, nice town, bye, fuck you, destroy.
I remember one time we were driving into Boston together on your book tour for Loom of Ruin, and we had Slayer, Raining Blood came on. And you said, now imagine the opening scene of this film. It's George Washington on his horse, vaulting, the front lines of these Hessians, and this song is playing.
How terrifying would it have been
amazing
to see George Washington? He fought in battles after he was president.
Yeah,
during which of the rebellion, Whiskey or Shays Rebellion? I get them confused.
Think the Whiskey.
Yeah, he showed up.
Yeah.
Like, the fuck? What's
hey guys,
up? What's up?
Yeah,
I'm here.
Yeah,
what's going on?
I'm really good at this.
Yeah,
that's great. All right. I think we're good.
I think this was a good little podcast. I think we made a lot of progress here today, Jesse.
I think we did too. Oh, there's one more thing I just remembered. I always wondered about you. Were you influenced vocally at all by Darby Crash of the Germs?
No.
Because I hear him in you in Born Against.
I have heard that a lot from other people. And Tim Yohannan, the late founder of Maximum Rock and Roll, said, you remind me of Darby Crash, someone he knew and saw. And all of us were like, swooning. That was like the best thing that he could say. So I had never taken that seriously before, and then I did again. I probably will. The Germs are on a list of bands I'm going to take seriously at some point. I never have. I never was into them.
I recommend it.
Okay, I really didn't get their music. I mean, they're funny. They're cool.
They're definitely funny.
for what they did, but I never got why everyone thought they were amazing.
Yeah.
And also, I think that comparison to me seems a little like that's where I arrived at, like I wasn't trying to do that. All the bands I've been in have had these influences that were so badly mimicked that the influence wasn't really readable,
Yeah.
So that's fine.
I get that.
And that's how art works in some ways.
Okay, so thanks a lot for listening to this episode. I hope you're inspired to check out Sam's writing if you haven't already. And you absolutely do not have to be a punk rocker to enjoy the book Mutations. Oh, and in the intro, I realized I forgot to mention Sam's third band. They were called Wrangler Brutes, and they put out a couple great records in like the mid-2000s. And I should also mention that one of my previous podcast guests, Brooks Headley, the chef owner of Superiority Burger, was the drummer in both Wrangler Brutes and the final incarnation of Born Against. So you see, it all comes together eventually. Please go to shopapology.com and click into the podcast section for show notes for this episode. I'll be doing those for all episodes going forward, and eventually I'll do the first few episodes retroactively. And again, as I've mentioned before, I know the URL shopapology.com sucks. I'm working on it. This episode was recorded by me in Pomona, California. It was edited and cleaned up by Justin Geller through the kind mediation of Lars Kreslins back home in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And the music is Bach, arranged and performed by Cyrus Garamani. Oh, and also at shopapology.com, you can buy Apology Magazine and some merch, some t-shirts and stuff. And that is how I will continue to live for at least a little longer. Okay, thank you. See you next time.